Good morning, fabulosities. How are you all today? I hope you're well. I am mostly well. I think the last little lingering bit of my cold is going. But when was the last video? Yes, yesterday, day before. The last video you saw, I was mentioning my back. I really did tweak it. I'm so cross with myself. It's like tall girl rookie error. Yeah, it's really sore. So if I'm looking a bit stiff and upright today, it's yeah, I think I was just I bent over into the cold frame, which is where I'd stashed the compost, hoiked it out, and I just wasn't thinking. I was kind of, I'd grabbed the bag, and in my mind I was already on to the next job. And so I think I sort of turned whilst I was still bent. Just goes to show, doesn't it? So I was just catching my breath then, because I'm breathing really shallowly because of it. But yeah, it just goes to show, doesn't it? When we're in the garden, you just have to be mindful, be in the moment of the job you're doing, and think about the position of your body when you're doing it. So it's a bit annoying. It's majorly annoying because I'd like to be in the garden right now, carrying on. I've got so many lovely things to do. Oh, you know, it's funny because I've always been such a summer person. I adore summer. In the summer, I feel most me. And it's remarkable the number of people who comment to say, you look really well in the summer. It's partly because I always get a tan. But I think what there's, oh, there's another deep breath. I think what people are seeing is actually the happiness of my soul coming out in the summer. Likewise, in winter, folk will often say, oh, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm perfectly well, but I just don't, because I'm just not myself. Autumn, generally I'm kind of sad because it's the passing of summer, but actually this year, you know, we're only a few days into autumn, but I'm really loving it already. I'm really loving it because summer was so difficult and it just became this slog of watering. But now we're into September, the weather is a bit cooler, we've had a bit of rain. I feel like I can get back to gardening again. Yay! Brilliant, so happy about it. Excuse me, slog of water. So on the subject of getting back to gardening, I thought I'd just have a quick chat to you today about the Penelope Lively book, Life in the Garden. So a week or so ago, I think it was a week. Gosh, is it a week already? Anyway, I talked to you a little bit about that book I'd just finished reading. From here, you can't see Paris. Wow, I had to think for a minute. So a couple of things. I really enjoyed sharing that with you. But what was lovely was your response. And a lot of you said, oh yes, can you do a sort of a book review as a regular thing? So I don't know that it will become a regular thing per se, and I'm not sure it will be exactly a book review, but I'm always happy to share and talk about whatever book I'm reading because I love reading, and I know a lot of you do also. Some of you mentioned with that last book that I should put it into my shop. It's not going into the shop, it's going to Paul, because he mentioned that he liked the idea of it, so he'll have it. However, this one, now I finished it, it is now in my shop. Oh, by heck, this back. So just before I talk about this book, what's been lovely is all sorts of memories have been provoked by it. It's absolutely wonderful. So the first thing was, I was thinking, I know of Penelope Lively's work. You know, she's done a lot of work, and I was thinking there's Moon Tiger, something about Mark, what is it? According to Mark. These were books that were always showing up in my old bookshop. So I've always known of her. She's very much there in any literary person's presence, as it were. And I thought, I don't think I've ever read one of her books before. How very remiss of me. And I was thinking, with such a prolific output, has she won a Booker Prize ever? So the Booker Prize it's a literature prize each year, and it can pretty much make an author. So I had a little look, and yes, there we are. She won the Booker for Moon Tiger. Now, as soon as I looked up that on the back, on the back panel, the little biog of the author, as soon as I checked that out, I suddenly had this memory sort of swoop down on me that was gorgeous. Back in my bookshop days, so the shop ostensibly dealt with out-of-print books, second-hand. It was a second-hand bookshop, but not like, your charity shop second-hand. We did have a few paperbacks, but it was mostly sort of out-of-print things, collectibles, rare, scarce things. For any of you who've ever seen the film, is it 64 or 84? 84 Charing Cross Road, the Helen Hunt book, which has triggered something else I'll talk about in a second. Imagine that kind of bookshop. That's the kind of bookshop we're talking. And I had a client who set me a challenge. It took me, I think, about a year to complete for him. But I was given a challenge of putting together the entire Booker library as it was at that point. This must have been about 2007, 2008. How long has the Booker Prize been going? 50 odd years, can't remember. But it was a vast collection of books. Now you might think, oh, easy peasy, just go to your local Waterstones or any other, main book dealers on the high street and just buy them, and if they don't have them, order them. No. This particular client wanted all of them as first editions, so the hardback, in their dust jackets, no less. So yeah, it took me about a year to complete that challenge for him, but I did put the whole collection together. Beautiful to see them all together. That got me then thinking about dust jackets, because the dust jacket, the original purpose of the dust jacket was always plain, going back 100 years. It's just plain paper. It was purely to protect the book, because actually books have become quite expensive again, haven't they? But once upon a time, 100 years ago, a book was a relatively expensive thing to buy when you look at sort of income, that sort of thing. So the jacket was there purely to protect this precious thing underneath. Now, of course, the dust jacket is the selling point, isn't it, for the book? I've got to wriggle around a second and try and get comfy. Oh my giddy goodness. Yeah, the dust jacket is very much the selling thing. How many of us buy a book purely based on the dust jacket? So this one, for example, really pretty, like sort of a decoupage of pressed flowers. Absolutely gorgeous. And the dust jacket thing brings me onto the book I'm going to have a brief chat about after I've chatted about this one. So my mind is all of... I've suddenly got thoughts of Helen Hunt's book. Set that thought aside, try to remember it. So yeah, it's been lovely. It's been lovely to read this, and just that whole thing of the Booker. It took me back in time to some really happy memories of the bookshop days, etc., etc. Anyway, on to this particular book. So it's quite interesting to read, following on from the Restaurant in France book, because that was very sort of very character heavy. It wasn't a story, it wasn't a work of fiction. There was no sort of beginning, middle and end, but there was definitely an impetus through the book to hope for the restaurant to succeed, for this whole village to succeed, for the individuals in the village to succeed. So there's that investment as a reader, and you're investing in these characters and their journey and their outcome. This couldn't be more different. Again, it's non-fiction. I tend to mostly read non-fiction. This is sort of musings on gardens, as you would guess from the title. But also, well, the fact that Penelope Lively is a writer, a literary fiction writer, and she gardens. So she's sort of channeling those two aspects of herself and just musing on sort of, she gives herself a few subject titles. So the written garden, the fashionable garden, style in the garden, town and country. So taking each of those headings just allows her thoughts to ramble on that subject, focusing on the garden. So I think if you're the kind of person who, if you need a really strong storyline to take you through a book, I don't think it would be for you. If you like to dip into a book and for it to provoke all sorts of your own ideas, then yes, it's a great dipping book, I'd say. What I really enjoyed is throughout she references gardens in writing. You know, in some instances, specifically in fiction, in literature, where these are imaginary gardens that the author has created in order to either, let's ignore my phone, in order to either sort of set the tone for what's to come, to reflect a character's state of mind through describing a garden. So it's very much a sort of the fictionalized imaginary gardens. But she also talks about some of the great garden writers of the last 100 years or so. So she references Gertrude Jekyll, Beth Chatto, to name but a few. I loved it because, you know, it's sort of the perfect book for me, isn't it? I love to read, I love to garden. She also references quite a lot of artists. There's a whole chapter at the beginning looking at specifically the literary, the made-up, the fictionalised gardens and the gardens in paintings. And she ponders about how much that writer or the artist was a gardener. To be able to portray a garden in such a way, you have to have some sort of knowledge of, love for gardening. So it was really enjoyable. And what was really interesting was pretty much every author she mentioned is someone that I've read and loved too. So she spoke about Virginia Woolf, she writes about Elizabeth Bowen, who I think Elizabeth Bowen has pretty much disappeared off the radar, but I loved her books. I read all of Elizabeth Bowen's books when I was about 14 or 15, revisited them in my 20s, and then revisited them in my 40s, and it was really interesting to reread them as a mature woman, as opposed to this kind of pubescent, only just beginning to become a woman. Really, really different take on them. I knew this would happen. Digressing. I think one of the things I really loved about reading this was I would literally read a few lines, close the book for a moment, and just allow my own thoughts. So she was talking about Elizabeth Bowen. I sort of allowed myself to remember the books of Elizabeth Bowen that I've read and loved. She was talking about Monet's Water Lily series of paintings, which is, fabulous. If you ever get the chance, if you're in Paris and you're at the Jardin de Tuileries, please go to the Orangerie. It's at the opposite ends of the Jardin to the Louvre, but well worth it for, oh my goodness, immerse yourself in Monet's water lilies. What you may not know, if you've never seen them in real life, is they are vast. They are vast. They are floor to ceiling. And in the Orangerie where they're displayed, they're on a slightly curved wall, so you almost get enveloped in the painting. It The paintings pretty much go to your peripheral vision. So yeah, completely in the painting. Oh, lovely. So you can tell from the way I'm talking about this, there's all sorts of ideas, there's all sorts of references, myriad references. And what was wonderful was all but one, literally all but one references in this book were things which I've either read, seen, experienced, thought about in some way or other. So it was lovely. It was so beautiful. Because I'm trying to formulate my words now. Get your words right, Ruth. Because literally everything she said, I was thinking, yes, I know that, I love that too. It felt intensely personal. It almost felt like this was my diary. It was lovely. It was. That's the best way for me to describe it. It feels very personal, and I guess that's partly because it's very much her personal thoughts and feelings on all these different subjects. And it did make me think, by the time I got to the end of it, perhaps I should read some of her novels, because maybe I'll like them. If I liked this so much, and if she likes all those other cultural references that I like, maybe I like her novels. I won't rush out to buy one, but if I happen to see any whilst I'm at a second-hand bookshop or a charity shop, then I will certainly, if it's 50p, I'll grab one. So, in summary, yes, it's very much gardens are the centrepiece. Oh, there's also a lovely little bit about gardens in children's literature. So, of course, she talks about The Secret Garden, and one of my favourites, in fact, so much of a favourite, after I'd finished the chapter that night, the next morning I went to my favourite second-hand book place to see if they had a copy of Tom's Midnight Garden. Who hasn't, as a child, waited for the clock to strike 13 in order to go and play in the Midnight Garden? You may have seen in the back of shots when I'm sitting at the sewing table, my grandfather clock. I grew up with a grandfather clock. The number of nights I would lay in bed under my sheets trying to stay awake. Oh, the clock would strike 10. I'm getting sleepy. Drifting off, the clock would strike 11. Keep your eyes open, Vivi. You've got to stay awake until midnight for the clock to strike 13. I never did make it to midnight, and therefore I never did make it to the clock striking 13. But you know what? One day, you never know. So yes, lovely. Yeah, like I'm saying, reading this, it's provoked all sorts of wonderful memories for me. So I would say, if you like literature and if you like gardens and gardening, you probably really enjoy it. I'm sure you will. It's beautifully written. It's very, you know, there's not, she isn't verbose. It's an easy read. If you have zero interest in literature, well, you're probably not watching this video for starters. But yeah, I would say if you've got zero interest in literature, art or gardens, don't read it. It's not the book for you. It does what it says on the tin. So, back to the Helen Hanff thing and 84 Charing Cross Road, I'm sure. I've started my next book. Quite often, I think I mentioned this in the new year when I was talking about books, I like one book to lead into the next. I like there to be some sort of connection so that when I start a new book, it's not too much of a jar and my brain is fighting to get back into the last book. I'll try and explain that. Let's say I'm just looking at my bookshelves for an example. Let's say I'm reading a book about mountaineering. Let's say I'm reading a book about the 96, is it 96? How time flies. Disaster on Everest. So, it's a modern book. It's, you know, about the mountains. It's about survival, etc., etc. If I was then, oh, here's the example. If I was then to start reading an Elizabeth Bowen book set before the First World War or set between the two wars, about a young girl going off to Paris, you see what I mean? It would just jar. I'd be reading about this young girl, but my mind would be on a mountain relatively recently. So I generally have a little stack of books lined up, and I might think in 5 or 6 books' time, I want to be reading a mountaineering book. So I'll think ahead and I'll try and weave it so that my books take me there. Quite often what will happen, and it nearly happened with the Penelope Lively, I'll read one book, I've got my next book lined up, but during the reading of this book, the Penelope Lively, I suddenly think, right, I want to read Elizabeth Bowen next, and I ditch my pile. But I haven't ditched my pile this time. I'm reading a work of fiction, which is very unusual for me. So it's partly, I'm hoping it leads into my next few books. I picked this book up a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, a month ago. I don't know, time disappears, doesn't it? Paul had mentioned it, I think in a Sunday chat or something. And I thought, oh, sounds interesting. You know, when anyone talks about a book, generally it will lodge somewhere in my brain. And then a couple of weeks ago, I went to my local second-hand book place to drop some books off for them. I'd had a good sort out. I'd got quite a few books. I thought, I'm not going to reread them. Quite a few of my books I will reread, but these ones I didn't. So I dropped them off. And when I was there, I thought, well, I'd better have a look at the shelves. I promised myself I've got enough books to read, but I had a look. And it was one of the first books I saw was this exact one that Paul had mentioned. So I thought, and I think it was like £2. I thought, oh, well, go on, I'll take a punt. And I'm sure a ton of you have read this already. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. Now, when Paul had mentioned it, there were 2 things that struck me. It said literary. I thought, I'm a literary girl. And potato peel pie. What on earth is potato peel pie? That's piqued my interest. The reason I'm mentioning it under Helen Hanff is this is a novel via letters. So the characters are writing letters to each other, which is quite a difficult technique for novel writing because you have to be quite clever. I've only read the first few pages and she's done it a couple of times already. But for example, in a normal novel that's not laid out like letters, the author will, for example, describe the main character, describe them physically. So you get a picture of them. They will describe the character's house, the character's town, the character's dog. There are all these descriptions so that we as the reader can form the pictures in our mind. But of course in a series of letters, if someone writes a letter, if I was to write a letter to you, I wouldn't in my letter say, by the way, I'm 5'10", I've got dirty blonde hair, it's very dirty blonde, I've got dirty blonde hair, grey eyes, etc, etc. I just wouldn't write that. I'd write, hey, how are you doing today? Just thought I'd let you know, great week in the garden, whatever, chit chat. So it's a really tricky one, and she's already got it right in a couple of ways. And like I said, because it's a series of letters, it reminded me so much of 84 Charing Cross Road. Thoroughly enjoying it so far. And it's weird because going by the cover, it looks a little bit girly for me. And I would normally think, oh, is it girly? Is it romantic? Can't be doing with that. But yeah, so far so good. I've read a little bit about the author, a little bit about the history of the book, because it's got a bit of history to it. I'll catch up with you on that when I've finished it. Like I said, I'm sure there are loads of you who've read it already, because it came out in 2008. Last year or the year before, they made a film of it. I would never watch a film before I read the book. Always read the book first. Let your imagination and your pictures will be far better than any film director can do. But yeah, so I'm coming to this very late compared to a lot of people. But it's just the way I buy books, you know, because I buy secondhand. I buy things when they speak to me on the shelf in a shop. I'm not buying stuff that's current and modern necessarily, although the one after this is quite current. I will talk about that as well, and the reason that I've picked it to come after this one. But yes, there we go. So, I've gone on one again, didn't mean to, but there we go. One thing I did want to talk about though is in the Penelope Lively, there's a chapter all about taste. I don't mean taste as in eating, taste as in your aesthetics. And it was funny, there are mentions of all the different flowers. There's different flowers throughout the book. And I was thinking, it's funny, isn't it? There are some flowers that I really don't like at all. And you'd think, wouldn't you, that somehow or other, even if it's not a favourite, that one could learn to at least like it or accept it as a particular flower. But there's a couple that I have an absolute visceral reaction to because I hate them so much. I absolutely loathe a couple of flowers in particular. I'm not going to say what they are because I don't want to offend any of you who might grow them and love them. And of course, taste is so utterly subjective anyway, isn't it? You know, half of you think I'm mental for the fact that I don't like sweet corn, mange tout, or melons. Some of you think I'm mental for liking the aniseed flavour of fennel. We've talked about that before. But yeah, it was interesting reading it. Every time certain flowers were mentioned, I was like, ugh. And funnily enough, just to say very quickly, then I will wrap up. I was saying how so many of her literary, art, culture, all the different cultural references, I was thinking, Penelope Lively, get out of my head, they're all my things. You know, I was thinking, we're twins, although separated by, I think about 35 years or so. Anyway, thinking that all along. And then she mentioned one flower that she really, really likes and has them everywhere. And I was thinking, oh, Penelope, you've just gone down in my esteem. Not funny. Of course, when visiting other people's gardens, one must always be polite and nod. Yes, it's lovely. Oh, get me out of here because it's full of That's my worst flower, Right. Well, little catch up, just to share another book. Hope you enjoyed that, and maybe, you know, it might, if it sounds like the sort of book you like, I'll do a link. I've put this one in my own shop. So my own lovely, well cared for copy is in the shop now. When I read any hardbacks that have their dust jacket, I always take the dust jacket off to read to protect the book, because as an ex-book dealer, I can tell you that in out-of-print books, so much of the value is in the dust jacket. I mean, it can literally stick another 0 on the cost of a book. I'm talking the difference between a book, you know, selling for £10 and a book selling for £100. I know it's crazy, isn't it? It's not crazy because paper, you know, dust jackets get ripped, they get thrown away, they get grubby, dust jackets disappear. So to find the absolute treasured book you want in a first edition with its dust jacket, you see what I'm saying? Right, I really am going to go. So, thank you for hanging out with me today. It's always lovely to have you here to chat to, especially when it's a chat about books. And like I said, when I've finished the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society, what a mouthful, I'll catch up with you on that and introduce you to the next book in my pile, which I think is going to be quite difficult emotionally but also quite amazing from everything. Literally, everybody I know that reads has read it and had pretty much the same response. So I'm looking forward to it, but also looking forward with a bit of trepidation, and I will definitely have my handkerchief to hand when I read it. But more of that in my next book review. All right, lovelies, take care. I'll see you again soon. Hopefully in the garden, if my back relaxes a bit and stops going, It's feeling a bit better having sat here and talked to all of you. You're healing me. Thank you. Okay, until then, take care. Look after yourselves. Have fun, whatever you're up to. Bye for now.